Could the New York Rangers make a play for Kirill Kaprizov? We discuss.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blueshirts fans, to episode number 1383 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, got a lot to do here today. Want to begin with some of the recent rumors surrounding Kirill Kaprizov, and he seems to be at something of a standstill with the Minnesota Wild in terms of his next contract, length and dollar amount and the whole 9 yards. So we'll discuss that. We'll also discuss how that applies to the Rangers. Could they potentially be in on somebody like Kirill Kaprizov, either via a trade now, a trade at the deadline, or free agency next offseason if Kirill Kaprizov makes it that far and does indeed become a free agent. I think of those three scenarios I just laid out, that probably the most likely one, if Kaprizov was to become a New York Ranger, would probably be via free agency next offseason. But never say never for the other options as well. And before we get too far ahead of ourselves here, let me also just mention that with Kaprizov coming to the New York Rangers, the odds are against it simply because there are 32 teams in the NHL, and you get the feeling that obviously he's going to have a ton of potential suitors if he makes it to free agency. You got to also believe that the Wild are going to do everything in their power within reason to hang on to him for a long-term deal. But the reason that everybody's talking about Kaprizov right now is because he was offered a record-setting contract, and we'll get to the details of that contract in just a second. But for the time being, it's worth pointing out that he is entering the final year of a 5-year deal that is paying him $9 million per season. He will be an unrestricted free agent once that contract expires at the end of this upcoming season, and he will be 29 years old at that time. So you can understand why there's a lot of buzz around Kaprizov right now, and a lot of people speculating what the future might hold for him. It's kind of a similar situation as Connor McDavid. The fact that two of the best players in the NHL, in McDavid's case, the best player in the NHL, are going to be potential unrestricted free agents. That's pretty wild, and I'm for all the chaos. Give me McDavid making it to free agency. Give me Kaprizov making it to free agency. Eichel, Kempe, any of the other big names that are out there. I think that would be awesome. That would just be pure chaos next offseason. You got to believe the Rangers would, in one way or another, be in the middle of all that. I don't know that they would necessarily land any of them, but they would do everything in their power to get at least one of those guys, I think, for sure. But as far as where things stand between Kaprizov and the Wild, and why fans of all teams are talking, and certainly fans of the Rangers are talking, it's basically at a standstill per multiple reports. The Wild recently offered him what would have been a record-breaking contract. The terms were said to be 8 years at $16 million per season. So that would be a grand total of $128 million on the contract for Kaprizov. That would make him the highest paid player in NHL history. Right now, Draisaitl has the biggest contract at $14 million per season. This apparent offer from the Wild to Kaprizov was for $16 million per season. And apparently, at least for the time being, he has balked as said offer. And it's kind of crazy to think that he would do that. I mean, first of all, just an astronomical amount of money, right? You're the highest paid player of all time. But beyond that, the Wild offered him 8 years. And the way free agency works is that a player's current team can offer one more year than any other team that would be able to bid on him in free agency. So if Kaprizov was to make it to free agency, nobody else would be able to give him more than 7 years. And that will change next offseason. We're eventually going to get to 7 years for the current team, 6 years for every other team. But, you look at it right now, the way things stand right now, if any other team right now was going to was able to get Kaprizov to the number that the Wild are at, the total amount of money, which is $128 million, then a team would have to do that for 7 years, meaning the average annual value would have to be $18.28 million per season. Now, never say never. All it takes is one. That is a crazy amount of money, though, even for a player as talented as Kirill Kaprizov. But these contracts in the next few years in the NHL, they're going to get pretty crazy. They're going to get quite a bit higher than I think we're accustomed to seeing, even for the best players in the league. Now, Minnesota is expected to have $39 million in cap space next offseason. So The money is there, the budget is there, but per Pierre LeBrun, it sounds like the Wild and Kaprizov, it's getting a little bit contentious. It's getting a little bit not cordial was the term that he used. So we'll see. It's possible Kaprizov just prefers to go somewhere else. Now, this all begs the question. We'll bring it back to the Rangers here. How seriously could, should, and will the Rangers be on acquiring or signing Kirill Kaprizov if he makes it to unrestricted free agency in the second part of that question? Would they trade for Kaprizov? Again, I'm going to say probably not. You would have to right now, I feel like, just give up an absolute boatload of assets, whether that's prospects, multiple draft picks, multiple first-round draft picks. And if you do that, then you better get a long-term deal in place for Kirill Kaprizov, because certainly you don't want to give away a whole boatload of assets to acquire Kaprizov and then have him for only one season. And very clearly, as we're finding out, he's not going to sign for cheap, whether it's with the Wild or the Rangers or anybody else. So the one way that I could see the Rangers potentially dealing for Kaprizov is if the Rangers have just an awesome season. And hey, sign me up for that scenario, right? I think we'd all sign up for that scenario. But if the Rangers, if we're getting toward the trade deadline this season and the Rangers are one of the best teams in the NHL as far as record, as far as eye test, as far as like, okay, this team actually looks like it's built for a deep playoff run, and they really could be one of the last teams standing and maybe even go all the way, then maybe in a scenario such as that, Drury would be aggressive and he would push for a trade for Kaprizov. Again, he's not going to come cheap, but the one reason why you might be aggressive in such a scenario is because you're only guaranteed to have one more season left of Panarin. So if nothing else, that will put the two of them together on the same roster for one big time run at this thing. I still don't know that that's the way to go, because you're really, I mean, it's basically how they won the cup in '94. So it worked back then, but you're selling away, in a situation such as this. If you're going to trade everything that it would cost to get Kaprizov, then you're kind of selling away your future in a way. Not saying that it's impossible or that they couldn't do it under any circumstances, but that's a lot to consider. Another big hurdle here, because I know some people are going to point this out, and certainly we're going to point that out here as well, is that the Rangers right now, as far as cap space is concerned, they don't have much of it. They've got $778,000 in cap space. Kaprizov right now is making $9 million. So you would have to get really creative, whether you trade for him now or during the season, in terms of how you even would conceivably fit this guy under the salary cap. There would have to be quite a bit of cap space unloaded in other deals, maybe even as part of this deal with the Minnesota Wild. We'll see how that would shake out. But you would have to get really creative to even make this in any way, shape, or form even somewhat possible. Now, the more likely scenario, if Kaprizov was to come to the Rangers, is not via a trade now or at the deadline. To me, the most likely scenario, if Kaprizov comes to the Rangers, comes to Broadway, it is that the Rangers would go after him in free agency next offseason. I 100% expect the Rangers next offseason to be in on some of the bigger names. I think in a perfect world, the Rangers nab at least one of these guys. It's going to depend on how many of them, like we talked about, end up making it to free agency. McDavid, it could go either way. Kaprizov, it could go either way. Even Jack Eichel could go either way. Adrian Kempe, he's been a favorite of mine for a while. And when you look at, those four names I just mentioned, he might end up commanding the least amount of money, but he's a really good all-around player. When it comes to all-around game, I mean, he does more to help you win. I'm not saying he's a better player and more impactful than somebody like McDavid or even Kaprizov, but when it comes to just the full-body, all-around game, Kempe, he's one of those dudes for sure. But again, whether it's Kaprizov or anybody else, we'll try to keep the focus on Kaprizov, where we're talking about all these different free agents. Rangers next offseason projected to have $29.6 million in cap space. So, yes, I expect them to be aggressive. Kaprizov, specifically, phenomenal player, still in his 20s, will still be in his 20s next offseason as well. And I have no doubt that the Rangers are going to be aggressive. I think for sure that will happen. Now, how exactly do you make all this work? Do you re-sign Panarin? One of the drawbacks that potentially going after a Kirill Kaprizov is it could mean that the Rangers let Artemi Panarin walk in free agency. And if it came right down to it, if I had to choose between the Rangers re-signing Panarin or the Rangers going out and getting Kaprizov next offseason, I have to be honest here, I would take Kaprizov, because Panarin is quite a bit older. He's Panarin, I think, is 33 right now. So he'll be getting into his mid-30s, and Kaprizov won't even be 30. So when you look at it that way, I think Kaprizov makes more sense. A lot of this also begs the question, because Kaprizov and Panarin are apparently pretty good friends. Would Panarin take a little bit less from the Rangers to remain a Ranger, beyond this upcoming season? Is there a world where you can sign both Kaprizov and Panarin? I think that is doable. Just kind of sizing up the salary cap situation. I think certainly it can happen, but there won't be a whole ton of money left over to do a whole lot else. Now, it helps that the salary cap is rapidly rising every season, but you have to fit under the salary cap at the start of every season. So that's something to keep in mind here as well. Now, something else, a couple people have floated this possibility as well, and we'll talk about it right now. It's possible that Kaprizov might want to go a little bit shorter on his next deal. There are rumors that McDavid is looking to do the same thing. They're not necessarily looking for a maximum length contract. If Kaprizov were to sign a 3 or 4 year deal, then he would be only 32 or 33 when the contract expires. You got to figure if it's a shorter term deal, it will mean more money per season. And it will also mean that he'll become a free agent again, and he'll do so at a time when the salary cap is just risen by that much more, and all these contracts are just that much more expensive, and he can cash in again, sometime in his early 30s. So, we'll see. I do think that people that want Kaprizov and Panarin, it certainly could happen, but it's one of those things where, I don't necessarily expect them both to be on the Rangers next season. It's at least possible, but I get the feeling this could be the end for Panarin. We will see how it goes. But Kaprizov is obviously, if he were to come over to the Rangers, going to take a big chunk of the salary cap. Now, it's also worth pointing out, Michael Russo, who covers the Wild for The Athletic, very reputable, writer for the Minnesota Wild, he did list a couple of teams that he sees as possibilities. He said the Rangers, the Canes, the Blackhawks, the Kings, and the Lightning. So we will see. It's an interesting group of teams, but 100% the Rangers will be in on Kaprizov one way or another. But I don't think anything is imminent. I don't think we're going to have breaking news later today that the Rangers have acquired Kirill Kaprizov. Never say never. But, again, you look at the salary cap situation, you look at the money, and I don't even know how you make it work right now. So I think the Rangers are to make a move, if they are to strike on Kaprizov, if they do want to lure him to New York, I think next offseason is the time that they very likely do it. That's, of course, assuming that he does not sign an extension with the Wild before then. But we'll keep an eye on it. We'll see how it goes. It's certainly an exciting topic to discuss because he's one of the best young players in the NHL and has been ever since he made his debut. I think teams will be lining up around the block to try to sign him if he does become a free agent, but the Rangers will certainly be in that group. So in just a second, we're going to keep everything rolling. We're going to shift our attention to the conclusion of Rangers rookie camp. That obviously just ended yesterday as I'm recording this. It ended on Tuesday, and we've got the full training camp coming up. So we'll discuss the end of rookie camp. And then we also had to say goodbye the other day to a Ranger legend. Eddie Giacomin passes away at the age of 86, and we'll discuss him, his career, his life at the end of today's episode as well. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you are ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you will get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel is the best because it lets you bet however you'd like. There's player props, you can build a same-game parlay, or you can even jump in live as the action is unfolding. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It is quick, it is easy, it is the best way to add a little more energy to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Big shout out to the Everydayers, as always, for sticking with this podcast throughout the entire season, the entire offseason. So a little bit later today, and it's Wednesday as I'm recording this, we are going to have Chris Drury and Mike Sullivan meeting with the media. So what we're going to do, I'll watch that if the Rangers make it available, or we'll get some highlights from it later, at least some quotes, and we'll talk about some of the biggest takeaways from said press conference in the next episode of Locked On New York Rangers. And then eventually we will also be releasing our episode on Will Cooley, his best and worst case scenarios for this upcoming season. So definitely looking forward to all that. For right now, though, let's go ahead and talk about the conclusion of Rangers rookie camp. It's always an exciting time, good chance to get a look at some of these young players. Obviously, the kind of the main event of the entire week-long camp is the two games between the Ranger rookies and the Flyer rookies. We got a little bit of everything in camp and in those games. We saw some more established guys like Brandon Hoffman and Scott Morrow. They turned in very strong performances throughout the camp, but especially in those 2 games against the Flyers. Brent Othmann in the 2 games combined ended up with a goal and 3 assists. But perhaps most importantly, he was just a very, very noticeable player. Between the whistles, after the whistles, pretty much everything. He was not shy in the slightest about mixing it up with the players and the Flyers. He was involved in too many scrums to count after the whistle and played a physical brand. We had that play where the Flyers won a face-off in the Rangers zone, but then the puck went back to the Flyer defenseman, and Othmann just absolutely steamrolled him and took off with the puck going the other way up the ice. Or no, the puck kind of shot away from Othmann because he hit him so hard that the puck, I think, ended up all the way back in the Flyers zone. But it was great to see Othmann asserting himself, playing physical hockey, playing, for lack of a better term, with some of that bleep you that he was known for even prior to the Rangers drafting him. So I think, if you're a little bit concerned about Othmann and his lack of production thus far in the NHL, hopefully you're feeling a little bit better, at least after these 2 games against the Flyer rookies. We'll see how it translates into the NHL regular season, because I do think Othmann will end up making this team. The other Ranger that I mentioned a second ago, one of the only other guys in this camp with NHL experience, is Scott Morrow. He ended up with a goal and 3 assists. I'm really, really, really beginning to think that Morrow is going to make this team, and not just make this team, but that he will be in the lineup on opening night, probably on the 3rd pairing. If I had to take a stab at it, if I had to take a guess, I would say Morrow would end up probably on the 3rd pairing for the New York Rangers. As we talked about, we did an episode a while back where we took a look at a couple of different training camp battles, guys battling for a spot in the power play, and who's going to be the 3rd line center and who's going to be the 6th defenseman. We really focus in on the 6th defenseman battle because I think it comes down to Scott Morrow versus Urho Vaakanainen, and I think Morrow's going to win it. Vaakanainen, for a number 6, number 7 defenseman, he's fine, he's okay, but I feel like Vaakanainen, he's 26 years old now. What you see is what you get. I don't think we're going to be seeing some kind of monster breakout season from Vaakanainen. Again, he's okay as a 6 or 7 defenseman. He's fine. But in terms of upside, I think Morrow's got him beat by quite a bit. Morrow's 22 years old. He's just getting going. He was considered one of the biggest prospects for the Carolina Hurricanes. And honestly, right now, you could say he's one of the biggest prospects for the New York Rangers. But he was good. Something else that really helps Morrow's cause, and some of you guys pointed this out as well, is his ability to quarterback a power play. And we saw that on display in the 2 rookie games against the Flyers. Pretty much anytime the Rangers were on the power play, Morrow was out there kind of running point, making some good passes. And like I said, he ended up with 3 assists and the 1 goal as well. And when you look at the Ranger team right now, and you look at a defenseman for the 2nd power play unit, because obviously we know Fox is going to be on the top unit. We all expect and understand that. But the 2nd unit, you're not so sure who it's going to be. If Scott Morrow doesn't make the team, then which Ranger defenseman are you putting out there on the 2nd power play? I would say probably Braden Schneider, but Scott Morrow, and it was on display in those 2 games against the Flyers, you can tell he's really in his element when he's quarterbacking a power play. He sees the ice very well, great passer, and I thought did well defensively, throughout these 2 games as well. He had a little bit of a hiccup in the first game. There was one play where he turned the puck over when he just didn't need to, but other than that, he was a big-time positive standout for the Rangers in that 2-game set. And I just get the feeling that they'll give him every chance to make this team. And if he does, unless he struggles badly, I think he's going to make the team. You'll see him as the number 6 defenseman, and then Vaakanainen will probably be the 7th defenseman and the healthy scratch on opening night. Somebody else that kind of stood out a little bit for me in this tournament was obviously Gabe Perreault. Big hopes and big expectations for Gabe Perreault with the New York Rangers. We saw him conclude his college career at the end of last season, ended up playing in 5 games with the Rangers. I'll be honest, Perreault did have an empty net goal and also an assist. Both of them were in game 2. He didn't really stand out as much to me as some other players on the New York Rangers. And to me, this just kind of builds my personal conviction that I think Gabe Perreault should be starting this upcoming season in Hartford with the Wolfpack. And look, there's still a ways to go here. We got 6 preseason games. We've got all of training camp. He should be given a chance to make the Rangers just like anybody else. I know that's his goal, to make the New York Rangers, and that's great. But I feel like, again, the Rangers have rushed prospects in the past, and sometimes it has not paid off. It's probably worked against said prospect. Let's just err on the side of caution right now and get Gabe Perreault some seasoning in the AHL. You call him up when you need him during the season for the Rangers. I certainly think he'll be caught up eventually. But again, I just don't think he really stood out in that much of a positive way in these games. He didn't play poorly or anything like that. There was a great pass that he made in game 2 that got the Rangers a goal. He was it was a 5-on-3 power play, and I think it was Morrow who passed in deep to Perreault. And Perreault made a great one-touch pass across the top of the crease I want to say to Noah Laba on the other side. Whoever it was shot and scored. So there are flashes, and there were even flashes last year when he was playing with the Rangers, but let's build his confidence with the Wolfpack. Let's call him up on an as-needed basis. That's my takeaway from Gabe Perreault from these games. And a couple of guys that we didn't really get to talk about in the game recap episodes. One of them is Jackson Dorrington. I wanted to give him a little bit of a shout out here. 21-year-old defenseman. He's got really good size, 6'2", 192 pounds. He was part of the trade with the Canucks this past season that saw obviously JT Miller return to the Rangers. And that's, of course, the attention grabber. When you look at the meat and potatoes of that trade, it's basically JT Miller for the first rounder. I realized the Canucks also got Philip Hedl. They also got Victor Mancini, and that's great. And all the best to Philip Hedl. I will never miss an opportunity to give my well wishes to Philip Hedl, and I hope he comes out and just kills it this season for the Canucks with all the concussion history that he's had and everything he's been through. But you know, the guy that kind of gets lost in the shuffle, gets lost in the mix, and understandably so, is Jackson Dorrington. Now, the reason he stood out in this 2-game set, for me at least, very simply just where they played him in the lineup. I mean, Scott Morrow, you had to figure he was going to be on the top pairing. He was out there with Jackson Dorrington, and I realized it's only rookies, it's only the young guys, right, that are participating in this camp, but I wasn't really expecting that. I mean, I don't know who I necessarily was expecting to be out there with Scott Morrow, and maybe that's part of the reason why it was Dorrington. There weren't really a whole lot of other obvious options. Also, there's the fact that Dorrington's a lefty, Morrow's a righty, so, you know, he's got that going for him as well. But he was solid. You know, he scored a goal in game 2 and seemed to have decent chemistry with Morrow, despite the two of them probably just meeting each other for the first time at the start of this rookie camp. Overall, I thought he played well. I thought that pairing looked pretty good together. Now, Dorrington is a former 6th-rounder. It's not like this is a top-of-the-line prospect for the New York Rangers. But again, I thought he looked solid in this camp, and I think it does say something that they had him on the top pairing. He also played for Northeastern University for 3 seasons, 105 games there, 8 goals, 25 assists, was a plus 17, and then played his first 9 pro games this past season with the Hartford Wolfpack, a goal, an assist, and a plus 1. So, you know, again, I feel like they see him as probably kind of a long-term prospect. I don't think they necessarily think that he's going to be playing any kind of a major role with the Rangers this upcoming season. But I will be very, very curious if the Rangers find themselves in a situation where, you know, maybe injuries pile up or whatever it might be, and the Rangers have to call somebody up from the Wolfpack. Would they opt for one of the veterans, you know, Mackey, Scanlon, Fitzgerald's now the captain of the Wolfpack? Would they call up one of those guys? Or would they opt for rolling the dice on one of the younger defensemen like a Jackson Dorrington? I get the feeling it would probably be the former. They would probably call up one of the veterans, but it's an interesting food for thought. I'd love to know how the Rangers feel about Dorrington because, again, it was so easy to just kind of look at him as the throw-in of that trade, but, you know, maybe there's something there. There's got to be at least something the Rangers like about him if they went either way to, you know, make sure he was included in the trade. So we'll see how it goes. Another player that we didn't really talk about a whole lot in the game recap episodes was Adam Sikora, former 2nd-round pick by the Rangers. I've kind of talked about how it almost feels like he's something of a forgotten Ranger prospect at times because there just doesn't seem to be a whole lot of buzz about him. But I also get the feeling for somebody that was taken, you know, pretty early in the draft, late in the 2nd round, the Rangers seem content to go kind of the long road with Sikora. I mean, he just turned 21 earlier this month. It feels like he's been with the Rangers for a while, or it's been a while since he's been drafted, but there is still time here, obviously. He's still very young, but he was buzzing in these games. I thought he was really a standout when it came to the Rangers penalty kill. There was one shift in particular where he got in there on the forecheck, got the puck, you know, all to himself. He's by himself in the Flyer offensive zone, and he's skating this way and he's skating that way, and basically just bleeding time off the clock for the Flyer power play, and that was great to see. Had a decent scoring chance or two as well, and he was playing in a top 6 role. He was out there with Dylan Robrick and Yaroslav Smalash, so that was the de facto second line for the Rangers. Didn't really light up the score sheet last season with the Wolfpack. 9 goals, 21 assists, a total of 30 points in 71 games. He was also a minus 23. But again, I feel like Sikora, for somebody that was drafted somewhat early, it's starting to feel like the Rangers see him as a little bit more of a long-term, you know, project than most 2nd-rounders would be. Just kind of my gut feeling. And, you know, we've been talking about how different Ranger prospects might end up making their NHL debut, their Ranger debut this upcoming season. Gut feeling, I don't think we see Sikora this upcoming season, but I do think we'll see him make his debut by the following season at the latest. But we'll see how it goes. He's somebody that's certainly intriguing to watch with the Wolfpack this upcoming season. But in just a second, we're going to keep everything rolling. I do want to say a few words about the late Eddie Giacomin. He passed away a couple days ago at the age of 86, like I said. Really an interesting story. Obviously, the backbone, for some of those great Ranger teams of the 70s for sure, and even the 60s as well. We will talk about him in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers by saying a few words here about Eddie Giacomin. Again, he passes away at the age of 86. Now, I must say, Giacomin was before my time, so immediately I'm jealous of any of you that got to see him in action because he was just a phenomenal goalie for the New York Rangers. Really the first in a long line of like truly elite, truly spectacular Ranger goalies. Obviously, I'm old enough that I was able to see Mike Richter in action. Obviously, winning the Stanley Cup in 1994. That was a great year to obviously become a Ranger fan. Then it ends up being Henrik Lundqvist, who basically comes out of nowhere as a 7th-round pick. And now we're living right in the middle of the Igor Shesterkin era as well. But again, Giacomin was the first truly elite, truly special goalie for the New York Rangers, at least in my very humble estimation. There might be some love for some other guys that manned the pipes for the New York Rangers. But for me, the proof is in the pudding because he was the first Ranger goalie to ever have his jersey retired by the New York Rangers. And of course, his number and his name are now in the Madison Square Garden rafters. And he was the first goalie to get that distinction. He has since been joined by both Mike Richter and Henrik Lundqvist. But even to this day, I mean, all the years of Ranger hockey, we're about to celebrate the centennial here, 100 years of Ranger hockey. There are only 11 players with their jerseys in the Madison Square Garden rafters. So just an incredible distinction in and of itself. I was watching, some old highlight videos of Giacomin and some old interviews, and he was interviewed by Sam Rosen when I'm assuming this was either the day or maybe like the day before the ceremony where his jersey ascended into the Madison Square Garden rafters. But he was asked by Sam Rosen, what's that going to be like for you? And he said, I never thought this day would come, only because you dream of making the NHL and winning a Stanley Cup, but whoever dreams of having their number retired? And I do think there's something to that. I mean, you dream obviously of you're growing up and you're making your way in the ranks of hockey, and you're dreaming about getting to the NHL. And obviously everybody, when they're a kid, they're running around and they've got a fake Stanley Cup that they're holding over their heads. That's what you dream about. But that's that's almost too big of a dream if there's any such thing. But he seemed very humble about the whole thing. And obviously he was somebody that was very, very proud to be a New York Ranger. I saw some other interview where he said that he wanted to be a New York Ranger for the entire duration of his career. He didn't want to go anywhere else. He did end up with the Detroit Red Wings at the end of his career. The Rangers, moved on from him during the early parts of a season. But in total, he ends up with 13 seasons in the NHL, 10 and a half with the Rangers, and the final 2.5 with the Red Wings. But in total, 610 career NHL regular season games, a record of 290 wins, 209 losses, and 96 ties. He also had a .902 save percentage, a .282 goals against average, and 54 shutouts. He also appeared in 65 Stanley Cup playoff games, went 29-35 with a .281 goals against and an .897 save percentage in those playoff games. And perhaps most notably, he was, again, one of the backbones, if not the backbone, of the Ranger team that made it to the 1972 Stanley Cup final. He was their top goalie during that run. Now, unfortunately, the Rangers, as we all know, or can at least infer, they lost because we know they went from 1940 to 1994 without winning a Stanley Cup. But they made it to the final in 72 against the Bruins. They lose in 6 games. Giacomin, was one of the driving forces for that team. Worth pointing out that he won the clincher in the first round against the Montreal Canadiens, and we know how good they were back then. And that might have been a little bit before their heyday, but obviously there's a ton of history there, and they've always been a force to be reckoned with, certainly back then. But in Game 6 against Montreal, Giacomin stopped 23 of 25 shots. That helped the Rangers defeat Montreal 3-2 and win that series, that best-of-7 series, in 6 games. But Giacomin that year played in 10 of the 16 playoff games that the Rangers competed in, went 6-4, 270 goals against average, and a .902 save percentage. Now, he was splitting time by that point with Gilles Villemere. And, on paper, you would think that, for such a great team, that could cause something of a goalie controversy. And maybe it did to a degree, but watching old videos about Giacomin, it sounds like the two of them were actually pretty good friends, and they supported each other, and the two of them actually split a Vezina award, because back then the way the Vezina worked, it didn't go to the best individual goalie. As strange as it sounds now, it would go to the best combination of goalies of any team in the NHL. So the two of them combined to win that award. It was more of like a team goalie award than an individual goalie award. And again, that sounds strange, but obviously Giacomin did his part in making sure the Rangers brought that home. But I really wish that I had gotten the chance to like live through this era of Ranger hockey. Like if there was any era of Ranger hockey that I could go back and see that was, obviously before my time. You think about maybe when the team was just getting started because of the historical aspect to it. You think about obviously 1940 because they won the Stanley Cup. And then you think about these 70s teams and just, going from some of you guys, some of the old school Ranger fans that, watch this show and support this show. Thank you guys so much for that and for providing me with some of this this background to some of these earlier Ranger teams that were before my time. But it sounds like everybody talks about these 70s teams like just such a fun team, such a likable team, a team that had such a brotherhood among all the different players. And obviously, Giacomin was a big part of that. You had the gag line there as well. And speaking of which, Giacomin, in one of his interviews, he was talking about that run to the 1972 finals. And something that happened that season was Jean Rattel had an injury late in the season, and he was over 100 points that season. He eventually made it back to the Rangers in the playoffs, but just was clearly not at 100%. There were some other injuries as well. And Giacomin was talking about in an interview, like he would have loved to have, had a chance to go for it with the Raiders at 100% and at full strength. And maybe they win the Stanley Cup if that's the case. I mean, it's at least possible. We'll never know for sure. But I feel like that would drive you crazy, whether you're Giacomin or anybody else in that team, wondering like, if we were at 100%, would we have won this series? Would we have taken down the mighty Bruins and won the Stanley Cup? It's at least possible. But I mean, what else is there to say? He played without a mask. There's that. That just blows my mind on so many different levels that this was ever even allowed, much less done so widely by so many goalies across the NHL. And I realize, pro athletes, they've gotten bigger, they've gotten stronger, they've gotten faster. These shots that they unleash are that much harder than they were back then. But my God, you're playing goalie without a mask. I mean, it's only a matter of time before your face gets broken, basically. That's basically the long and short of it. He overcame some adversities. I saw a story in a video on YouTube where, there were people early in his career that didn't think he was any good. And to his own admission, he got off to a tough start in the NHL. This is a quote that he had about it, though. Here's a boy from Sudbury, Ontario in New York, one of the biggest cities in the world, forgetting one thing, you got to stop pucks. And I just wasn't doing it. And apparently there was a game where he had a particularly rough outing and fans were throwing hot dogs and peanuts at him. Now, that I will never condone. I mean, I said I'm not a big fan of even booing your own players, to be completely honest. But with that, I've always said, well, people pay for their ticket and they're certainly not cheap. So if you go in there, you have every right to cheer and boo anybody you want, even though I'm not a fan of booing your own players. But I mean, that kind of stuff, I would never condone that. Throwing things at anybody, much less your own goalie. I mean, that's not going to help him. But Giacomin credited Emile the Cat Francis with kind of instilling some confidence in him. Francis was coaching the Rangers at the time and pretty much told him, listen, you're my guy. We're going forward with you. I believe in you. And Giacomin then began to turn things around and obviously put together an incredible career after that. He would mix it up. He would get into skirmishes despite being the goalie. Very acrobatic goalie. You can see that on some of his highlight reel as well. And would freely admit, he did this in an interview that I watched, to hitting guys between the legs with his stick. So it's a different time for sure, but this guy was tough as nails. I mentioned not wearing a mask and even mentally tough, going through those struggles early in his career and being subjected to things that you shouldn't be subjected to from fans, being pelted with hot dogs and peanuts. So yeah, man, I mean, what else can you say? By all accounts, just a wonderful person. There were a lot of former Rangers and journalists and whatnot posting their condolences on social media and talking about what a great guy he was and how friendly he was to everybody. Lived a full life, 86 years old. And certainly he will be missed among the Ranger faithful. And if you grew up watching him or you have memories watching him, my heart goes out to you as well, because it's always tough to lose anybody from the Ranger family. That is for sure. One last order of business before we call it here. So you've probably noticed new background, different background here for Locked On New York Rangers. We've got a couple different items here, as you can see, that we got Okay, this way. That's me and my family as South Park characters. So that was really fun. My wife got that for me for one of my birthdays. I'm a big fan of the show, and I just love that picture. So I wanted to get that in here as well. And we've also got this way, the Stanley Cup over my left shoulder here, just to remind us all what it's all about. You know, we've only gotten one in 85 years, but that's the dream. You know, that's why we do this. That's why we watch the Rangers. We want to see this team eventually bring Lord Stanley back to Broadway. Now, there were a couple of other options as far as a new background here. I knew I wanted to do something with the upcoming season right around the corner. One option is we could just pull back the camera a little bit, which I just did for anybody watching on YouTube. Now, if we go with this setup, you can also see there's a standings board over my left shoulder. You can't see the whole thing right now, but I can move that maybe over here. You know, that's certainly an option. We'll call this option 2. The camera shot that I use for the entire episode, that's option 1. This is option 2. And then we'll go ahead and we'll move this back to where it was. But then I was also messing around down here. I'll show you a couple of different pictures of this as well. I would have to put my desk in kind of a weird spot in the room, but I thought about going with this background. There's a still image of me trying to figure out, you know, what we're going to do here. We could go with that. There are a couple more items in this picture, as anybody watching on YouTube can see. And then this is if we really pull back the camera, and now you can see like the entire basement, and my dog's there in the bottom left corner as well. So you guys let me know. This one right here, this is option 3. And then this will be option 4. So anybody watching on YouTube, you let me know options 1, 2, 3, or 4, which you prefer. I'm kind of leaning toward just doing what we're doing right now. But we'll see. You know, I'm open to suggestions. I'm open to moving some other things around down here. You know, we'll see how it goes. We're getting geared up for the next season, and definitely want to freshen things up a little bit with the new season right around the corner. But that will do it for today. Once again, if you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @jchick17. Once again, that's @jchik17. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.